Hi, 3DMJers. This is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, just wanted to remind everyone to head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and sign up for our Big 3 newsletter. We call it this because, in case you haven't noticed, our team comes up with 3 new pieces of content every week in the form of 2 articles and 1 podcast episode. Rather than remembering to check back with us 3 times a week, we can send it all to you in one single email every Thursday. This weekly digest also includes direct links to any other content that Team 3DMJ coaches are a part of throughout the entirety of the internet. Whether that's guest appearances, interviews, seminars, or courses, you will not miss any of it. So if you like hearing about all the free resources that we have to offer, all the products we sell, all the projects we are a part of, and all the ways you can get discounts, reminders, and early access to them, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com right now and sign up. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. Today I'm joined by Alberto Nunez and Eric Helms as we talk about what it means to be evidence-based. This has been quite the hot topic within our social media circles, and some of us have even been asked to debate this around the internet on a couple of occasions. The buzzwords of evidence-based and science-based are great badges to wear, but it appears that some are more concerned about being identified under this tagline rather than they are about actually engaging with the research. And today we're going to be talking about how this desire might cause a problem and how you can make sure to be a responsible practitioner and consumer of evidence-based information, even if you don't have an advanced degree in higher education or what have you. So you're also going to hear us talk a lot about research reviews throughout this episode. Specifically, we continually refer to one called MASS, which is Eric's recently launched review titled Monthly Applications in Strength Sports. And it actually just came out earlier this month. If you want to learn more about this monthly review and possibly become a subscriber, please feel free to visit 3dmusclejourney.com/mass to get further in explanations and about what it is, to get some previews from Eric, Mike Zordos, and Greg Knuckles, who are the 3 researchers that contribute to this publication. So again, that's 3dmusclejourney.com/mass, MASS. And now on to the show. Here is how you know if you're evidence-based with Eric Helms and Alberto Nunez. Eric, it's episode 50. What are we talking about? Tell everybody, because
I think we should just take a moment to say thank you for sticking around for half 100 episodes.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive. If this was a grade, it'd be a solid F.
Yeah.
Close to a D. We're approaching it.
Did you know that in New Zealand and Australia, they grade harsher, but the scale is lower? So a 50 out of 100 is like a C.
Great.
Oh, wow.
Another reason to move there.
Yeah.
Is this how you're getting your PhD? Is that what happened?
Yes, all of the grades I get in my PhD because I'm taking all these classes, even though it's completely research. But
it's too hard in America.
Can't do it. I'm just going to go to Kiwi Land where they give you a C instead of an F. No, it's actually, but it is graded harsher, so it's kind of ends up being the same.
What's the lowest passing grade?
50.
I think it's 50.
50, okay.
49.5. 1.
If you round. Or is this for us?
Eric,
speaking of education, though.
Good segue.
I'm segueing it right to this.
Okay.
We're going to talk about how you know if you're truly an evidence-based professional in the game. This has been a topic as of late, and I have had some chats about it with some folks in the industry on a more kind of nerdy theoretical definition kind of perspective, but I think it's probably more useful to speak directly to the trainers out there and maybe help them figure out if they can self-assess what they are and have a discussion about that.
Okay.
And what it means and what's useful, and more important than the term, what's the best way to make sure that they're doing things in the most up-to-date manner.
Yeah. So first thing, 2 things in that is, 1, we said assess yourself as though it matters, right? And then also the definition of evidence-based. So 1, can we define it? And 2, why do we even fucking need to? Sorry, dang, I cursed early in this one. Sorry.
Are we? Have we been trying not to curse in these episodes?
We get 5 an episode. We get 5.
Is this a new thing?
Usually it's when I get heated that they just start flying out, but nothing even happened yet.
True.
This is going to go well.
You say the F word as much as you say the THE word. So
I was like,
that's
thesaurus?
What's the THE word? Oh, that's the. Yeah.
I was like, what starts with the O? That's just it. Okay. I said 2 things. I need rebuts.
Oh, so I have to disagree with you?
No. Okay. Give me feedback on that. Why do we need to tell if we're even evidence-based or not? Is it just because people are talking about it now?
Well, great question. I think we've always wanted to know if we're evidence-based. And basically, from the perspective of a trainer, you want to know if you're doing things in the most effective way possible, based on the best evidence possible. Now, that, of course, is its own question of how you define the best evidence, which we're going to talk about. But yeah, I think, like, if we did not care at all about being quote-unquote evidence-based, then we would just do, yeah, it works for me, bro, and we'd see all the problems. I mean, the whole reason why we promote an evidence-based approach is because of the problems when you do not promote an evidence-based approach.
Right.
Harming your clients, getting them slower progress, all that jazz.
Okay. So how do we define it?
That was part one.
Yeah. What's your definition?
Well, I think, one thing that we came away with in that discussion I had with Greg Nuckols and Ian McCarthy and all those guys and Andrew was, in the end, I was like, I don't know that we necessarily need to have a definition, because there are competing definitions out there and all that stuff. I think more importantly, it's just to talk about what's the best way to stay up with the latest evidence.
Okay.
Because I think what people currently do probably isn't the best way.
Okay.
For the most part.
And what do they currently do?
Well, all right. Maybe I'm just going to misrepresent some people, but I'm sure some people will resonate with this. So you follow your handful of people who you have seen seem pretty smart, pretty logical, and engage with the evidence, who may or may not be researchers themselves, or at least heavily influenced by science. Your Alan Aragons, your Breck Contreras, your Eric Helms, your Mike Zerdoses, your whoever, right? Mm-hmm. And they may have whatever method of disseminating that information, be they blog posts, social media posts, YouTube videos, and that's what you're aware of.
Right.
And I think that's good. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a step in the right direction. But the issue is that you are not necessarily seeing all the evidence. And Andrew, you've talked about this a few times on the podcast, where you can find a study to support almost any position. I mean, just statistically, because there are literally 1,000 articles published in sports science and exercise science and nutrition combined each month, and we know the way stats work, someone will find a false positive or a false negative.
Right.
So you can find a study that supports or denies any other position. But also based on the way stats work, we know that if you have an understanding of the broad picture of the research, you can go, 80% of the studies suggest this, therefore that's probably will make sense. But if you're only following a handful of people, or even worse, your favorite person, mm-hmm. no matter how smart or engaged they are, if they are not, trying to just report on meta-analyses or something like that, you can get a biased or skewed perspective on what the quote-unquote current evidence is.
Right. Okay. So, Bert, do you agree with that? That that's how you feel like most coaches get their information, is by the semi or fully famous people?
Yeah, I would say the majority of the people who I identify with that, they kind of just tag along with whatever a collection of their favorite folks are certainly agreeing with. And it's not until, like when I think of one that was rather conflicting in recent times, it was probably the when Menno and Eric weren't seeing eye to eye with the whole protein intake. And then everyone's like, oh, so what do I do? Like, can you guys sort this out so that I can, is it like 0.83, 8.81? What do I do?
Because it matters a lot. Matters a lot.
At 0.17 grams of protein.
That's what I'm saying.
Either way, people were worried.
Yeah.
You guys are supposed to be like buddies. What's going on here? Like, what do I do? So that is I'd say something that I do see quite often.
Okay, and in that talk, which we'll whether we do or don't talk about the fact that I tend to avoid consuming things like that, but on purpose, which I'm sure we probably will get to. But within that talk, what was the I want to say the angry point? Like, what was the problem, right? Because usually when someone's like, I want to make a video about this because people are doing this wrong. Like, what was the argument that's the wrong part, if that makes sense?
I think, and I don't want to
Put words in
misrepresent
mouths,
anyone,
yeah.
But the impression I got was that Andrew, Ian, and Greg were seeing people in the quote-unquote evidence-based fitness community who would post an abstract or repost someone else posting about a study and then potentially misrepresent it.
Okay.
Or act like it was the end-all be-all.
Okay.
Like, for example, we just did a little webinar for MASS that we just launched, our research review. And Greg went over double-digit numbers of studies where they looked at different intensities, like 80% versus 30% on 1RM, or matched for volume or matched for sets, and the effect on hypertrophy. And I would say, even me, who's pretty engaged with it, I was aware of about 2/3 of those. And I think most of the audience was probably aware of Schoenfeld's, and they might have been aware of the few ones that I cited in like the muscle and strength pyramids, like Campos and a few others, and then maybe Klem's, if you follow Zerdos, because Klem was one of Zerdos' students. So the average person in that webinar, even engaged and interested in knowing that the stuff's important, probably had seen at best 1/3 of those studies,
Okay.
And that's just not enough to get a real gauge of that topic, in my opinion.
Right. Okay. So when he's, or these people or whatever, like when you said people tend to share these abstracts or these, they'll screenshot some shit and then make a little tagline that like doesn't even talk about what it meant.
Yeah.
Are these just people interested in fitness, or is the problem that you find that these are a lot of like coaches and trainers?
I think they're
trying to be famous on their own, you know what I mean?
Or maybe even actually famous, they might be an influencer, if you want to use that cliche term, but I will, who has a following. They may be a coach or they may not. They may just be an athlete, but they're someone who inspires others, and they're seen as a voice of authority, even if they're not directly someone engaging in the research, which I think is absolutely fine. I think it's great to see practitioners who look to researchers. So anyway, to get back to what was the point of anger, or contention rather, was that I think one of the proposed solutions, or maybe just at least what I would call a pedantic disgruntlement over the definition, was that you can't call yourself an evidence-based professional unless you directly engage in the evidence and consider that.
Okay. So like, because Berto doesn't go to bed at night with 20 studies by his bed that he's just highlighting through and all that stuff, like he's not evidence-based.
Right, because of the strict definition of the term by Sackett from evidence-based practice, which not anyone in the fitness community is aware of or attempting to use that definition necessarily. That's not really a definition.
Yeah.
They basically, part of it is you need to, and again, the thing, not to paint these guys as putting research on too much of a pedestal. A big part of evidence-based practice is treating each client like an N-1,
Right.
And that once you have kind of used the current evidence to give yourself a starting protocol, which Jeff talks about, then you use the N-1.
Right.
Engaging with the evidence for the practitioner is part of the definition of being a quote-unquote evidence-based practitioner, according to that was their point of contention.
Within that,
so that if you were always consuming evidence with a step removed of, well, yeah, I consume evidence, I follow Alan Aragon, Brett Contreras, and Brad Schoenfeld, I'm good to go, that may not give you a complete enough picture of the broader evidence, which I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay.
So if they're doing their job right, then they're giving a broad perspective too. But everyone has biases.
Yeah. And shit, where do we go with all that? That was a lot. All right, so the last part that you said is following certain people good enough, right? And I arguably think it's better because they're trained in how to read that shit, and most people are not.
Yeah, that is. I think I got to a point where I was like, fair enough, guys. Like that can be an issue with the strict definition that you guys are talking about. But I don't think the solution is just to tell everyone in the fitness industry to start reading full text.
Yeah.
I'm not discouraging people from doing that. And I think so long as you know your own limitations of interpretation, that's something you should certainly aspire to do if you want to.
Right.
But I do think there are other ways to engage the evidence. For example, with Rudy MJ, that's my job to basically stay up on everything that's related to what we do, and then I disseminate that to you guys. The pro is it saves a lot of time, and I have certain expertise in it, and I don't have a vested interest. I'm just trying to help us. So I'm trying to get the best gauge of it. The con is that all 5 of us are privy to my biases.
But I think too. Go ahead. Sorry. Damn.
That's all right. That said, I would agree with you, Andrea, that because I'm a trained scientist, it's probably more likely to be a net benefit to be victim to my biases than to have all 4 of you try to make it through scientific evidence and take time out of your time you could spend coaching and potentially misinterpret research on your own, which of course I can do too. I'm not perfect. So I think that the net benefit to the team would probably be me is what we do. And I think that doesn't mean you guys aren't evidence-based. So I kind of disagree with that.
Yeah. And also I think sometimes people think like we have a meeting and the 4 of us sit there and Eric tells us how it is. And that's like, we tend to have really good discussions. We tend to ask the questions. I just don't want everyone to be like, so Eric fucking tells them all.
I lay down the research law because that's the way research works. One abstract tells you how to train people, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to, damn it. What were you saying, Bert, the other day when we were talking about bringing this topic up where like, Eric, you said N of 1. For the listeners, if you don't know what that means, is basically like there's the soul experiment is just you and your body, right? And versus like an N of 50, meaning 50 people studied in this research lab experiment thing. But Berto, you said something about how you're caught between 2 worlds where like there's this science and you're like, you go to the gym and you're a 3MJ coach and you like you're privy to all these things we talk about. And then you go to this super old school bodybuilding gym where you live and everyone's like, nah, bro, we do it this way because, and you try to tell them what you think and they're like, but this is how we've always done it. And obviously it works because I'm jacked. Right?
Yeah. It's really strange to be in that position because, and one thing to make clear for those of you guys who didn't catch that discussion on Ian's channel, I think the vibe was quite positive. I think they were the opposing group. I don't know what side Ian was on, to be honest.
He was trying to play mediator for the most part.
Yeah, and he did and I think they were very. It's an exciting time to like be involved with this because when I first started doing this, like you literally your source of information was like you'd watch Mr. Olympia's like video, and based off that you would pick little things and go apply that to your own situation at the gym, and that's very misleading. I think you can miss out on many like larger details and like what you might miss out on if you're not necessarily trained on reading research. And Brad Schoenfeld said this. You shared that on your wall. Views and like then how things are nowadays. And to me, for example, when I go to my gym with like my bro bodybuilders, it's like I'm walking into like 15 years ago, to be honest. And it's a little disappointing. And they're so green when it comes to certain things. And I mean, I love my peeps, but I frequently get asked the wrong question, or when like I'm sitting there and I'm telling them something that I feel is clear as day, like how your tricep doesn't necessarily help you supinate your like how you grip the thing. It doesn't really matter, So things that I'm like, this is so clear. Like, please stop doing that. Next day they're doing their triceps with the reverse grip because it's for the long head, right? So it's a strange place to be.
You good?
Okay. I thought something happened. Yeah, it's strange and uncomfortable to kind of be caught up in like both worlds. And personally, from my perspective, like seeing how much, at least within like my little inner circle of people, I'm always under the assumption that, this whole evidence-based thing. Sure, there's a lot of people out there who don't fully grasp certain concepts. I don't feel like um, they're quite established yet when it comes to um, being critical thinkers. But I think just kind of looking into this realm, that in itself is like, dude, at some point you decided to like make an about face in this direction. That's a good thing. You're on to something. But we're still like the minority. Like, and I, even when people don't get the big picture, I do my best to like not discourage them and have them like continue to look into that realm. And eventually they're going to get it, because where I was, say, 10 years ago when it came to this, and I think Eric and I were both quite fortunate in that, like, some of the first people that inspired us a decade ago, I mean, it's like past a decade ago, like Dr. Joe's, Lane Norton's, like we were brought up with that. But even then, like, we didn't really fully comprehend everything. I know for sure I didn't, but it kind of set me on the right path. So that's one thing that I don't want to do, is discourage people from like, hey, if you can't like read full text, if you're not like knee deep into the research, it doesn't mean you're not part of this community.
And it doesn't mean that a lot of those dudes look just fine and compete, and they're.
And not only that, but they're concerned about what they don't know, and I think that's the big part. When I go to that gym, like all these big guys that keep doing okay at these like local NPC shows, they think they know everything. Whereas I think our people, especially once you've done this long enough and you've been on this side long enough, your biggest concern is what you don't know. And every single year you can go back and at least retrace a few things, and you're like, I'm sorry, like I was a little off with that, and I think that's one thing that I see more so on, I guess, what I would honestly call like the true professional side of the fitness industry, is that, we're always like striving to change and learn more, even though we might not fully get it initially. So.
Right. Okay. So then this discussion then isn't really, it's not to sound like shitty, but those people aren't the ones that are like, we have a problem. It's like they're so far that way that it's like not even not worth it. But it's like, okay, that's not who we're talking to, I think.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
We're talking about the people. They're probably not listening.
Yeah.
Because they already know, right? Well, and there's a lot of it's almost.
But that is the majority of the fitness industry.
That is the majority of the fitness industry, but
By far.
Yeah. But in this conversation, it's the people that think they're evidence-based but are actually regurgitators. Is that?
I think that's maybe a harsh but
generally
concise way of putting it. That's it. I think there's a couple key things that we got to point out here. Is one, anecdotal and experience-based evidence is evidence, right? I think, and that's even in the quote-unquote evidence-based practice model. Is like that's a huge part of knowing what to do, that whole N of one kind of thing. And if you are a good practitioner and you've got a lot of data and it's meticulously kept and you're paying attention, your hundreds of plus hours of client work, a month or whatever should be heavily considered, So I think sometimes the quote-unquote evidence-based community becomes the peer-reviewed research-based community, and I think that's a mistake too.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
that's a good way to put it.
Where, we have to consider all levels of evidence in the appropriate context. So that's one thing. It's like, even if, like, I would say that if you feel like you have to post about science to get followers and to be popular and to be quote-unquote correct, don't undervalue your own personal experience. You don't have to be. I mean, I hope people who follow our podcast get that. We've, I think, shared a ton of useful information and insight that's primarily based on, practical experience and our coaching knowledge, which is something that is as valuable and more valuable in certain contexts. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is that you're probably moving in the right direction if you are, like, it's not a case of wrong or right, but if you are following those people I mentioned before and you are reposting the stuff they've said, that's not bad at all. I think that's how I learned to read research, actually, was following people who were engaging the research, and I saw the kind of their language and their thought process. And because I was someone who was curious and I was concerned about what I didn't know, I wasn't looking for a guru. I think where people get hung up is when they are looking for a guru. So they, for some reason, they can get convinced, okay, I'm not going to follow the gurus of old who I read on, whatever, Flex Magazine or whoever Olympia was, because, science is important. So now I'm going to base my new guru on who has the best science kung fu. I think that's a mistake.
Yeah.
Because a science-based attitude or being evidence-based, a new perspective has to come into place, that you're not looking to be a follower of someone, you're looking to be a follower of the best evidence. So you can get it easily twisted by thinking that the new commandments of your chosen guru are now based on science. Rather, it should be that person you're following is subservient to the evidence, and they're just trying to share that information. They're kind of an intermediary rather than your, God when it comes to information.
Yeah, and I think, too, a distinction would be like, are you an evidence-based coach, and then like, does your coaching practice depend on you posting research papers, right? Versus like someone who is a sharer of information and that is their business. Maybe not a guru, but like a content marketer, or someone like an Alan Aragon kind of thing.
A science-based writer, sure.
And yourself with mass, right? So it would make sense and be useful for you guys who do that to make these posts or whatever. But I think what I see a lot is a lot of fine coaches who have a good understanding of stuff making these like outrageous posts about science but getting it a little bit wrong, when it's like you don't need to do that though, because you're working with athletes and you have a good base, and there's no need for you to chest puff with like abstracts that are
exactly. Don't undervalue the knowledge you have. Don't try to play in an arena where you're not comfortable because you think you have to be good, and I think that there's a lot of negative effects from that. Like sometimes people will be like, I want to work with this guy because he knows the science. It means he's a good coach. It's like, being a researcher is not being a coach. I've met some people who know all the evidence who are terrible being coaches, So I think people just don't really get that those are not the same thing, but they're both valuable.
Right. And important. But
valuable and important. That's correct. You heard it here.
And important.
And
useful.
And useful and good.
and not bad. You know?
Yeah, other positive words that mean the same thing.
It's an important distinction, is what I was meaning with that.
Yes. A valuable distinction.
A positive one.
A useful distinction.
Okay. So then, are we? Help me again now, because I could talk about this too. Are we talking to coaches? Are we talking to? Because I think it is different if you're basing your shit. Because there's people out there that don't even want to be famous or don't want to be coaches. They just want to be better athletes.
Correct.
They just want to get more jacked.
Yeah.
Right. So there's like three different distinct. Can we do that? Can we talk about those three different roles? Okay. So you want coach, business,
coach,
or
science-based writer, or an athlete kind of thing?
Or
Yeah.
Okay. So which one you want to start with, athlete, coach, or a science-based?
Let's do athlete, because I think
provider?
almost everyone, because a lot of coaches and content marketers or whatever are also training. So let's do that because it's the broadest. So as an athlete, what does it mean to be an evidence-based athlete? And how?
It means you have to have some knowledge of what the best practice probably is, or what the ballpark of that is based on the evidence to start before you start tracking the N of 1 data. Because everyone's got to start somewhere. Or maybe you were completely on the Ronnie Coleman train, or the Jay Cutler train, or the whatever. You were following something that wasn't necessarily based on evidence, you're mimicking, which is an understandable thing to do if you don't know about science-based evidence or understand its value.
Right.
And you decide, you know what, I want to start fresh. I want to put myself somewhere in that ballpark and see where I lie. But I think it's easy to make the mistake of going, oh man, I'm doing more volume than this meta-analysis says. I need to cut my volume, without necessarily realizing that that's an average, and you maybe actually be doing an appropriate amount, or maybe even need to do even more if you're an outlier, to get optimal growth or whatever. So I think you do need to be aware of that ballpark before you start doing N of 1 data collection.
And to save time and not to sound like super salesy, but like basically the pyramids are a good that's why you made it, right? There's really nothing else that's like, okay, here, got it, your bases are like covered if you fully understand it, right? Which could take some people longer than others. But
you have to engage. I agree, but you have to engage where you're at. Like if you're super, super smart and savvy, and you have a background, let's say you got a master's degree in engineering or something that you've published, so you're aware of evidence, but you're not an exercise scientist. Maybe you are going to actually engage the research directly. If you're just a dude who's like, I lift weights and I don't know shit about it, and I don't even like it, I'd rather shoot myself than read a full text, then you would engage it at a different level as well.
Yeah, but at the same time, the prioritization in the pyramids, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Because you can read all the nuance if you're really smart and like miss the order in which it matters.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
And and I would like to think that everything I do, I consider consensus over my own ego, or I will only go out on a limb. If I do go out on a limb with kind of cutting edge or controversial data, I will say that. Okay, here's all we have. Here's my interpretation. I could be wrong. But just be aware that if you're like, I'm just going to start with the pyramids, that you are going to be subject to my biases.
Right.
I think that's just something to know. That goes back to just don't look to get a guru. Look to have someone who facilitates your engagement with evidence, but know that they are not perfect.
And I think what you did well, though, is, I guess, say what you just said, right? Throughout the period, it's not like you said this is all holy everything, but I just think that not like, hey, go buy this shit, but if you just watch those videos, or if you do whatever read an article or whatever on, again, just very grand concepts, because it could be like, I want to be a CrossFitter and I want to get jacked. The pyramids are not the best thing for you because you have a performance component that aren't involved, but I'm saying like, so I guess you could miss the mark terribly if you're not even in tune with your goals. But if you are like a bodybuilder or powerlifter, I'm confident not sounding like a salesy person when it's like the pyramids are a very good starting point. And they're not that biased.
I'll say why. No. Because here's what I will say is that just going out and reading science won't teach you critical thinking necessarily. And ideally, what you're getting from someone you follow, if you are engaging with these people, is not just whatever knowledge they're interested in right now or whatever recent publication they think is interesting or cool or controversial, but actually learning how to be a better critical thinker and becoming a more resourceful human, as Andrea says. And that's kind of the reason why I built the pyramids the way they are. They give, even if you don't even read any of the chapters, if you just look at the pyramid, it gives you a way of prioritizing things and thinking about it. And I try to always engender critical thinking in my material. And I think that's more important than, that's why, I don't really share around the debate with me and Mano, because whether you're trying to get a take-home number for your protein is much less important than learning how to critically think and evaluate research. So if there was value in that debate, it wasn't the conclusion. It was how each one of us interpreted things and what you might be able to learn from that process.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's why I agree with you.
Yes.
I think that's what you can get. That's what you should be looking to get from people you follow. And if they're not really teaching you that, and if they're just spouting off studies and information, okay, cool. But just know that's not necessarily representation of all the evidence.
Right. Can we go over some, that guru thing, right? And this applies to content you consume everywhere. And we keep saying if someone's a critical thinker, then anything they read will be more effective than if someone just doesn't absorb things the way they should maybe. So I could read the pyramids and only look at the pyramid and praise that as holy everything, but throughout it is explanations as to why. Like the way you write and good writers write, good scientific writers, right? Because I haven't read a study in I don't even know how long on purpose. But the way that you guys write and speak is very like, this is what we know, and we came about that in this manner. We thought we saw this side, we kind of saw this side, and because they kind of agree on some things, we take a little more of this, but because it's swayed just a smidge more this way, this is what I'm confident saying might work for most people most of the time. Like, that's very different than like, this works, you know?
Yeah. So actually, that's a good question, because I know let me ask Alberto and Andrea, since you guys
Bert, you go, because I won't shut
typically putting... Okay, Berto. Because you've been consuming information, and now you got one of your first books is Super Training, which is pretty unique and awesome. How do you tell the difference between someone who is spouting off bullshit and not helping you be a critical thinker versus someone who you would actually get brain gains from following? Not just knowledge, but actually being able to interpret things better.
So like going back to maybe like 2007, 2008, how I would perhaps...
Why?
Filter.
Here's a more direct question. Why did you follow Dr. Joe and Lane instead of Charles Poliquin?
I'd say the biggest thing was that I think when I started, it's like I didn't really understand what like a fitness dogma was. Like I just thought that's just how it's been done. That's how we do things. Just continue doing what obviously seems to have been working for many, many generations prior to you, right? And then when you hear someone who's putting something out there that is very conflicting, however, as they explain to you why they think in this manner, it makes sense. I think that is what initially gets you looking and like perhaps like, hey, you know, maybe we've been doing this wrong. Maybe what I thought was incorrect. And from there, like you start to question a lot of other things that perhaps you hold to be true. I think a big one, and it's crazy because this was so long ago, was like Dr. Joe with don't cut water before a show. Like that was so like mind-blowingly common that like, dude, I remember like people telling me in 2008. Like actually, in 2008, I recall that I'd say about 80% of competitors used to cut their water. And at this point, me and Eric were like pretty knee deep into like, you know, at least we were fans of the evidence-based movement. So yeah, that's probably the first reason that I looked up to guys like Dr. Joe, like Lade Norton, Lyle McDonald, because what they had to say was just so different relative to what everyone else was saying. But they also told you why they thought this way, as opposed to like, hey, you know, I'm like, I got 7 Olympias, dude. Like, what do you got?
So it was in the way they described why that was what helped you identify them. Because that's the same thing I experienced. Like, because there are some people who say things that are different, but it's and maybe even can explain why, but it's still bullshit. And for me, I can tell when they're trying to sell me something. I can tell when they're talking like in absolutes and they're exaggerating and they're like, you know, one cool trick kind of thing, you know, because that's a huge sales tactic, is to sound different than everything else and be like, oh, the doctors hate him, you know, kind of thing. But I think the difference between why that never sounds right to me is because they oversell the outcome too, you know, and they don't talk, and it doesn't sound logical to me. So I can identify when someone's not speaking logically when they're trying to sell and when they're preying on my insecurities, which is something that Jeff talks a lot about. And I think that's what Lane and Dr. Joe stood out, at least back in the day when I was following them, and Lyle and all those guys.
Okay.
Andrea, anything else you notice consuming information? How do you tell a con artist from someone who knows what they're talking about?
They're usually angry, not fired up, excited, but like pissed off. Like they come out. I don't do that very well.
So how did you ever listen to Lane Norton?
Well, good question. Good question. Very, like you said, absolutes, but also like outraged, not like snarky, but like everyone's told you this, but I got the one thing that like like very bashing, I guess. Not like, hey, this is this new thought and idea, and here it is, and this is why. But like, those ones are fucking stupid. We like this one. This is why you should do it this way. Like, so I don't respond well to that, but I think it's a hallmark of a lazy thinker.
Mm. Can you explain that? What do you mean by that? Someone who, because my first thought is, what about someone who is quote unquote myth busting something that's commonly done? Like if you're saying, hey, you shouldn't be cutting water. Actually, it's harmful and stupid to cut water.
Because
what's the difference between that?
You wouldn't do that. You would write an article about the reasons why it is not smart and the reasons why. Like you, I guess if you were writing a tweet that said that, you wouldn't do that though. You know what I mean? It would be like, cutting water is not smart, and here's a link to a big old article about why. Like, there's always an explanation, not just because I said so.
Got it. So it's never so basically you're sensitive to when it's an appeal to your own authority. Like you can tell when someone's like, because I said so, it's basically an appeal to authority, right?
Yeah, I
it's
guess.
Just that you're saying, it's me, when the person's saying that.
Yeah, I guess. When it sounds too good to be true, when there's only one side presented, not both. When it over promises,
those I think are keys right there. Because I'm trying to think of some of the stuff that I think masquerades as evidence based. Like I'm gonna call somebody out a little bit here, but like carb backloading, like John Kiefer's book. That bamboozled a lot of critical thinkers, in my opinion.
Bamboozled.
And then you start to look at it, and if you look at it closely, there is an overclaim of results in there a few times. There is kind of some black and white logic, and then if you really dig deep, you realize like some of his references aren't even like at all related to the claim he made, So, but that's the stuff that I think in that original conversation that Ian and Andrew and some of those guys are worried about is sheep's and wolf's clothing, if you will. Or no, wait.
On purpose?
A wolf in sheep's clothing. That's what. I don't know. I'm not claiming John Kiefer or those guys know they're trying to pull a fast one. It may just be their biases and that they're not that good with evidence.
It's hard. It's hard to talk about it now because I think it's hard to talk about it in terms of fitness because I think all of our understandings are so high level compared to most people that I'm like, how do I know? Like if there's someone writing an article, whether they present it well or not, I kind of can tell if it's bullshit because I already have a body of knowledge in my brain. You know what I mean? With fitness, it's hard, I feel like.
Well, yeah, I mean, you understand the basic concepts for sure. I mean, you've got a master's degree in exercise science.
Yeah.
Like if things don't, like if they disregard feedback loops or, general adaptation syndrome or things like that, it's going to be like, I don't think that's the way it works,
Yeah.
But what about for the people who don't have this is necessarily that solid of a background?
I know.
I think
hard.
that's a tough one. I think, and it's almost inevitable that you might fall victim to
because I'm sure that there's things in other realms of life that I still fall for now because I'm not educated in them. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. Like, it's hard for me to say in terms of fitness, what are some signs? Because maybe I do get fooled in like, a prime example, like my taxes. I'm like, just tell me what to do, lady, because I couldn't even attempt to read an article about this. Or like she'll send, like we had this thing with the Muslim strength parents, right? I get a big long sheet of things to do and consider from my accountant, and I'm like, what? I can't, like, I'm so over my head. And I guess that's one hallmark of a critical thinker. I guess I'm decent at that, and decent enough to know, like, I don't know a damn thing about this. This isn't my place. I need someone. I looked to you in that because it was our business together, and I was like, can you help me decipher this, because I don't even know what's happening. I can't remember the last time I felt that lost in terms of fitness information, but I don't know.
Sometimes the problem is you don't actually feel lost.
Yeah.
No, I think meta is important because what I guess I'm leading us to is that how do you arm yourself to be moving closer to being evidence-based? And I think the main thing,
recognizing you don't know.
Right. Exactly. 100%. And that's the first step towards critical thinking, So like developing your ability to evaluate claims, developing your ability to identify when someone is not giving all sides of the story. I think those are the most important things. I think probably we focus too much on the knowledge itself rather than the ability to interpret and understand knowledge.
Right.
You know?
And how do you develop that? Is that where we're going? Or do you not want to go that far into it and come back around?
Well, we can do that. I mean, I just think that's
the best
just
protection.
knowing that is the goal. Yeah, that is the best protection, and just knowing that actually is the goal. Because I think a lot of people, they're very pragmatic about it. I just want to know the best information. Unfortunately, just wanting to know the best information won't get you the best information, because you'll have no ability. Like, if you have no, like, I don't want to develop my ability to interpret research or be a critical thinker and all that. Just tell me what to do. It's like, well, you can have some asshole telling you what to do. So you have to have some level of gauge on the temperature of where the evidence is at, and also critical thinking.
Yeah, and I remember when I met Bert, I very distinctly remember telling him, or I made it in a video or something, I was like, Bert says he's going to coach me, I'll do whatever he says to do. Tells me to eat dog shit, I'll do it. Like, I don't care. I think I even said that. I was like, there's like a video on YouTube where I'm like, I'll eat dog shit if he tells me to. I'm just going to do whatever he says.
And I remember seeing that, and I'm like, no, that's not how this works.
But
our next meeting is amazing. Because Berto was like, I got this girl eating dog shit.
We should talk about that one day, what y'all thought about me before y'all knew me. Okay, anyways. But
thought your breath smelled like dog shit.
We could smell you through the video. What I did know, and I guess what I can say I still do and done from a young age, is before wanting Berto to be my coach and having him, whatever, I did consume literally everything he ever did on the internet. Everything 3DMJ did. Well, I mean, like, so that, I guess, is a way I did research, right? I didn't read there were no, like, there might have been, I was unaware that there's a body of bodybuilding research. I don't know if there was or wasn't at the time. I'm sure it started, but
There was.
See, and I was in grad school, and I was just like, oh my God, just EMG because get me through my thesis because I'm going to die. But my research was to make sure that I looked at all the coaches and which ones in that regard made sense, right? And the way you guys spoke to me was you made a bajillion videos about, there are a lot of Q&As, a lot of how you handled athletes, how you handle, I mean, we do it now too, but that's a form of doing research and finding but I would say I not intelligently did make Bert. Y'all were my guru.
It's not the worst thing in the world, because I think part of what, if I'm going to reflect back to everything you said, part of the reason we became your gurus was because we were doing a lot of those things that you didn't see other people do, that you didn't trust. Like, we weren't claiming we had the end all be all knowledge. We would give two sides of the story.
Right.
We would explain why,
I think what I
even
remember,
though you're willing to eat dog shit, didn't care. Like,
I don't think that was
you would
liberal.
still, well, yeah. Like, I think what I'm saying is that you were choosing the people to follow with a decision-making process that included, are these people honest and humble and engaging evidence and changing their minds?
Right. And I think I remember what you guys would say more than anything that always spoke to me was, but it's individual. It's individual. And like, that wasn't something that I found often. It was very, even then, the people that will say that now, like, there were a few other people I followed that are still well-known in the industry, but it was very prescription-based. Like, this is how you do macros to start a contest prep. And this is how you do, and it was very like, it wasn't, and it's still good information. Like, it wasn't bad, but it was like, this is how. Whereas you guys, and it might have been just because y'all were on YouTube and not a lot of people were yet, but you explained a lot, right? Y'all's articles weren't necessarily as explanatory as your videos, right? And other than your videos, I guess everything else was articles and pretty prescribey, I don't know. There's a lot of things that could have played into it, but.
I think with our background of coaching, we just knew all the times the best practice didn't work for an individual. Like, well, they were such an extreme outlier that it wasn't right, that we just never been comfortable making videos telling everyone what to do, because we've seen enough bodies and personalities that really would not work well for,
Okay. So strategies would be maybe never, I couldn't say never, right, because that would make me someone we're talking shit about. Okay. It would be a good idea, usually, sometimes, in most ways, to not take any one piece of content for gospel or one human, right? So making sure that you have some type of breadth to your consumption. Right?
Yeah. So if we're
athlete, right?
We're still talking
athlete.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm not gonna. There's
so I guess the athlete. I think the athlete should be trying. Like, if you are looking to follow people, you want to follow people who are trying to get the broad picture of the evidence. Like, we'll talk about this when we start talking about science-based writers, but because of the drive to create content, and I can tell you this as someone who creates content, you're often looking for the crazy cool study that had some weird shit going on, or the groundbreaking study. There's not really such a thing. I mean, there are, but for the most part, not one study doesn't dictate practice. It can't,
Yeah.
So the content that's put out by science-based content providers is not always necessarily a reflection of the greater body of evidence. So you need to pay attention to people who always keep that message clear. Like, hey, this is a cool, interesting study, but hey, here's how it fits into the broader research. Like, if they're not talking about how something fits in, or if they're betting the whole farm on a single study, then that's probably not someone you want to follow, even though they think they're probably quote unquote evidence-based.
I think too, this is a generalization, but I think as someone who, if you're an athlete or you're trying to get jacked or trying to lose weight or whatever, or trying to get stronger, and you don't have an academic background, I feel very strongly that you probably shouldn't be trying to read research. Unless you know you're going to invest years in learning how to do this, I think it's almost always going to be way better to read something like Mass or Alan Aragon's or Lyle McDonald's or someone who is already well established in that whole dissemination from a certain level to this lower level. But I think knowing what you don't know is just as important as like knowing what you don't know how to do. Right?
And I do think I would say that a huge part of my ability of learning how to read research did come from watching those guys do it. So I think an important thing is
piece it apart.
Yeah, because they would never just say do this. They would say do this because this study back in the 80s we thought this, back in the 90s we thought this. Hey, athletes have been doing this forever, and look at that. It actually lines up with this recent meta-analysis kind of thing, or whatever. So that's what I mean by choosing the right person to follow when they put that in the context. Yeah. But also, I don't think we should be dealing with people like their snapshots in their life. Like, yeah, if right now you feel completely not confident reading research and you're just an athlete and you don't have a background in academics, I don't think you should never try to get to the point of reading research. If that's something you want to do, I think following those people and doing what Andrea says, it's an investment, and you may get to the point where you can gain insight from taking a look at research from time to time. I think that's not a bad thing to aspire to.
It's not bad to aspire to, but if you're not willing to take it further than just reading it, I think it's more confusing than useful. So I do think it's a great goal. I just think most people aren't willing to take it as far as they should to fully grasp it. And so it might confuse most people, right? Would be more confused. Like if I go to Gold's Gym, I'm confident in saying I don't think 90% of y'all should be trying to read research papers. I'm pretty confident. But the 10% either or whatever that really do want to get better in this, I think a good way and the way that I learned in grad school, not because they told me to, but I just did. And like even with the pyramids is if you read something from one of these science-based writers, and if they are science-based, there will be references, and then see where it fits in within that article and why did they say that sentence or two about this. Like, what did this author get from that study? Not, let me just read the study and see what I get. Yeah.
You can also do it backwards, which I found is very, very useful. What I mean by that is you read someone else interpreting the article, then go read the actual article.
That's what I just said.
You can go like, oh, well, yeah.
Oh, did I say it wrong? That's what I meant if I didn't say it right. That's what I meant.
Then I agree with Andrea, and she definitely said that, and I knew that's what she said. But yeah, like so, like for example, like if you're subscribed to Alan Aragon's research review or something like that, and he interprets an article, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go find that full text, and you're like, I don't think I would have gotten that. That's useful information, like. So yeah, I guess I agree with you, Andrea, that you probably don't want to directly engage in the research and use it to apply to practice immediately, because you may not have the interpretive skills. But you can definitely attempt to read research to see how that fits with other people interpreting it as a learning tool.
Yeah,
like, kind of follow along with the research guy, and see if you can, if you get the same things out of it, or see what areas you're confused on, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So I think, like with Mass that we're launching, we have a interpreting research document. It's this big ass document that teaches you how to read research in our field, because we're not just trying to give you just the answers. We're trying to say, hey, we want you to learn by example, and we want you to develop critical thinking, so that you can build this muscle that's going to take as long as anything else to develop. That's kind of our perspective for the individual athlete.
Yeah.
If you want to go down that route.
And I don't think I think it's important for us to say, like, it's pretty okay and pretty common for you not to want to go down that route and just want to be better.
Definitely.
Like, I think some people feel like when they hear of the evidence-based community, like, I should be up on this stuff. And it's like, you can ride the surface and follow the right people and like all the things we talked about without having to engage in the research
directly.
Yeah.
And I think there can also be like a stepwise thing. Like you might start with, subscribing to a research review from whichever research review fits your kind of goals the best, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there you can, go out on a limb and maybe take a look at some position stands or some meta-analyses, right? And just focus on the discussion and the conclusions. And dare I say it, for a meta-analysis at least, just read the abstract. I know it's crazy. In addition to what you're already doing, so you're kind of learning how to interpret it and by example from the research review. And then you're starting to actually directly gauge probably the most relevant research, because reading an isolated randomized controlled trial that could have been a false positive or a false negative, that's not nearly as useful as going, I read this, like, I remember that one of the first full text studies I read was 2007 Warren Baum's systematic analysis of volume, intensity, and frequency and its effects on hypertrophy. And I slogged through that, but it was a review of everything that had ever come before it on upper body and lower body hypertrophy, and it gave some very practical outcomes in the number of reps that you would do on average, the number of times per week you train, and how heavy you'd lift to reach the peak rates of hypertrophy that they'd seen in the literature. And I was like, okay, I didn't go try to read one of those individual studies that he cited,
Right.
which could probably cause more harm than good if you don't understand the literature as a whole. So I agree with Andrea.
Right.
I think one thing that Ian said on that podcast that credit to him for not overlooking this was the way Dorian Yates did research on himself and how unique it is, especially for someone who's not coaching anyone, who's just an athlete, that you have such close controls over your own situation. Like, you're right there. You have the luxury of living with this person and seeing basically everything that goes into the outcome. So I think keeping a detailed records of your own situation is super, super, super important. Try to stay up with the latest, but definitely if you are you recently learned, it changed one variable at a time.
Bert, you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you lose?
Yeah, for a
Cut
sec.
out for a second.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you have so much control over your own situation, whereas me as a coach, I put these things out there for my athletes, and I get to work with them hopefully for an extended period of time, and over time we adjust and we tweak things to fit their needs. But I'm over here I hope that's what's being done. Whereas an athlete, especially if you're really serious about what you're doing and you really want to get better, it's man, you got full control over everything. keep track of your records and be very observant. That's one thing that I think made Jeff Albert so good prior to us kind of raining on this parade and hey, Jeff, flexible dieting, hey, a little more volume and frequency, is the fact that he was slowly getting there on his own.
He wasn't too far off from where we were.
No.
Even when we introduced him to some new concepts, he had already figured out on his own that cutting water hadn't worked for him. He wasn't following Layne Norton, or Dr. Joe.
Yeah, but what you said is real important, Bert, because we're sitting here saying, like, how do you learn to read and absorb all this information? But it's like, if you try to apply all the information, you're going to screw yourself anyway. So, like, observe yourself, stick to your own plan, learn to learn, not just learn to fix yourself kind of thing, right?
Yeah, as an individual athlete, by far the most important evidence, quote unquote, you're going to be engaging with is how you respond to things. So if you're not, you have to change one variable at a time, give things a chance, and then another chance. Like, I think we talked about how I found out that tyrosine makes me angry because I did it like three repeated trials, and every time I fucking got angry after a few weeks of doing it. And that's the kind of way you need to do it. Not, I started taking this supplement, I started doing 5-3-1, and I started following a ketogenic diet, and things went great, therefore ketogenic diet. It's like, what are you talking about? You don't have any idea what did what,
Yeah, so. Did that. I sure did that. Okay. So that's useful for an athlete, I think, what we just said, and that's not harming anybody if you fuck up, right? Yeah, you're kind of messing with yourself, right? Okay. But I guess the scarier parts, right? The thought leader, content marketer, whatever, the person who is putting stuff out in the world as a leader, and then this coach
first, or the.
I mean, I group that differently.
Okay.
Let's say both of them, right? Anyone who's producing content to establish authority, that's where it actually does have it can mess more people up than just you, and you have a
or even if you're just a coach who's just going off pure word of mouth, because you're still working with multiple people. You can mess people up that aren't just you.
Yeah.
If you're a trainer,
Right. So this is where I think, like you said, that your previous little round table stemmed from, was that it's a problem because it's a trickle effect. And it's a problem if you have like 70,000 Instagram followers and you're throwing horse shit out, right?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the potential harm.
So do you think that happens because lazy and need to put content out? Or do you think that happens because they don't understand that it's wrong? Or do you think both? Is there both?
Both happen. I think if I was to speak directly to people who are producing content, I would say, I get it. You got to put out a blog post a week. You have to create a video a week, maybe a day. You have to make an Instagram post every day. And you feel like, okay, if I'm going to be seen in this community as valuable, I have to engage with the evidence. So you're going to engage with what's hot, right? You're going to engage with the recent study that was crazy or cool, or myth busted a specific thing that people will still do that is problematic, and it shows you how you have this great knowledge and therefore people should sign up with you or follow your blog or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. I think you just have to always remember that the lessons you're teaching your followers in critical thinking are more valuable than the knowledge itself. And I think you also have to realize that what you're repeating may not necessarily be a representation of the broader evidence, but rather just that one interesting thing that's grabbed people's attention because it's controversial or quote-unquote groundbreaking, at least in the way people think it is. So you always have to put it in context. That's kind of the duty. If you're going to be someone who's going to be providing information, you should see it as your duty to not do harm. So that means you have to put it in context. You have to generate critical thinking, and you have to highlight. If you want to be evidence-based, then you have to have an evidence-based attitude. You have to not use logical fallacies. You have to present things in a way that shows an air of, and I could be wrong, and here's where it may not apply, and this is what we currently think. Not speak in absolutes, and not do all those things that we were talking bad about. So I think how you present information is more important than information itself. Nothing wrong with highlighting the hottest study. Just put it in context. Don't do harm. Be humble. All that stuff is very important.
Well, all that is correct. That's not. That's a good thinking point. Like that's a good oh shit, that's my responsibility. Yep. But what do I do about it? Besides don't post more of that dumb stuff. Right. Like got
that. Point two is look, if you want to be a evidence-based content writer, then this is where you do have to actually read the studies and be engaged with the meta-analyses and do all that stuff. And if you want to write about science but you're actually not reading the science yourself, then I hate to say it, you shouldn't be writing about science.
Yeah.
It's that straightforward. Like it's a little different for the coach and for the athlete. You need to be engaging with something that gives you the best information on an area. But if you want to be a evidence-based content producer, you better have your shit together. Or, one of the evidence-based sharks is going to get you. Lyle McDonald's going to get you. Got to watch out. Lyle going to get you.
And he's like Wolverine right now. Have y'all seen this? He's scary now. I know.
He's got the hair.
He's got these chops with the space.
He's an endurance athlete. You can run away from him, but he'll eventually catch you. And then he will harass you. All right?
No, but I think that's a good point, right? I think, Bert said most of the fitness industry, I think there's the difference too with an info marketer or whatever. Like you're talking about people who are claiming I spread evidence-based information. But correct. That is still a small percentage of all the Insta fitness, which is usually let me prove on my refeed day I can eat this, and so hopefully we know that, or hopefully you guys as listeners recognize that 90% of it's horse. I do donkey kickbacks with use the leg extension for the other click back, and this is how I engage my glutes. And there's all those that are because
there's nothing wrong with that. That's just because this is what I do. It works. Yeah.
You're
right.
I'm
not saying it works best. It works.
Yeah. Okay.
That's another thing. That's something we brought up in our webinar recently. It was just because science is always comparing two things, it doesn't say one doesn't work.
Yeah.
Training once a week, high intensity to failure, and not training body parts multiple times a week doesn't work. Of course it fucking works. It's worked for years. It just may not work as well as something else.
Yeah, so, I just think there's a difference between this is what I do, and either that works for me or it's sexy or whatever. This is what I do. But then there's the prescribey, but it's scary, and that's what we're talking about, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Nobody. I don't care if some random physique competitor shows you their own workout. That's fine. That's. Right. I don't think people follow that and go. Hopefully, people shouldn't follow that and go, this is the one way for all people to train.
But I think they do go, he's jacked, he's the best coach. I do think they do that sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you could say that person definitely knows how to train themselves to be effective. But that may just be because they have great genetics. Or maybe they actually are. Maybe they are great at learning what works for themselves. That's not the same thing as coaching.
Yeah, but I think a part of the critical thinking in us saying this is if you're looking for a coach or you are a coach, is understanding that in this critical thinking thing, right? Just because someone has a good athlete they posted about, or because someone is in fact jacked, or because someone did repost a study, none of those make someone a good coach. Yes, that does get the likes, and a lot of people will say, oh shoot, this girl's jacked. How'd you do that to her? By the way, do you have any openings? Because I'd love to work with you. That's bad thinking.
Yeah, believe it or not, being a good coach is what dictates whether or not you're a good coach, rather than your ability to analyze research, get jacked yourself, or helped, or showcase people who are also jacked.
Yeah, showcase someone who already looked...
Who would have been jacked no matter who.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's another hallmark of critical thinking that goes awry is thinking that all these things make someone a coach. But how do you know someone's a good coach?
You know what?
If someone's thinking I can't just throw the studies out, so how do they know I'm a good coach? They don't know I understand.
That's a very reasonable question.
They don't understand.
I think Berto was about to say something groundbreaking.
Well, I think the biggest thing to me, and believe it or not, this is the only coach I've ever hired is Lane Norton, for those of you guys who don't know. And partially because he did do a good job staying in his lane when it came to certain things.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of
Would
that
you say
makes me
that
trust
Lane stayed in his lane?
Lane stayed in his lane Norton. But he did. And um, yeah, I was impressed because it made me, especially the things that he claimed he knew, which were some of them were very over, like the top of my head at the time. It made me trust that much more, because I had seen, and we would all mingle on the forums, and I was more impressed with him, to be quite honest, whenever there were certain discussions, and like I think a lot of people out there like, really, Lane? But no, yeah, there were certain discussions that I recall coming up that like Lane's like, okay, yeah, I don't really fully get that, and it was, I think back when like Stu Phillips was like posting like on the bodybuilding.com forums, which is kind of crazy, or like discussions with Dr. Joe. So yeah, I think that's a big thing when people don't overstep their boundaries and start talking about things that they shouldn't be talking about. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can say, I know that some people, Lane's a controversial figure, primarily because he does get angry, he is opinionated. But one thing I've always seen, and I'll echo this too, and it's just true, is that when I've seen Lane engage on the forums or and stuff like that, like if something comes up that he's not an expert on, he won't claim to be, and he will say he's wrong. That doesn't mean he's not always, like, he can be wrong, and I've disagreed with him, and I've had a few debates with him and stuff like that, but I think when it comes to matters of evidence and science, he is pretty good about that. And that's something that comes from scientific training.
So back to, if we could, because I don't know if I satisfied the question I had, or maybe if I asked it wrong. How does someone who is a coach portray themselves as a good, knowledgeable, evidence-based coach online without doing a disservice or dumb shit? Well,
I think they need to talk more about the individual stuff, because I think that's what's interesting. I mean, that's what a coach actually does. They don't deal with means. They deal with creative solutions to individual problems, right? I mean, that's basically what you're doing, and a lot of that has to do with communication, building a relationship, and then making creative calls based on a tool belt, versus a one-size-fits-all. I think it's totally possible to write things or make videos about that. I would say our podcast is completely based around that. I think people can probably get a decent idea of whether we don't know what the hell we're doing or whether we can coach people effectively from our podcast. Like if we were constantly talking about, yeah, everyone does HIIT. Doesn't seem to work for half people, but I'm pretty sure they just don't try very hard. That would be like a bad sign, Or Jeff. I mean, Jeff's written some great articles recently.
Yeah.
That specifically talk about building a tool belt and developing critical thinking and treating yourself as an N of one and your athletes as an N of one.
Dealing with insecurities. That was a good. That spoke to a lot of people. There's a lot of comments on that.
I think that we all get in our own way for that type of thing, and part of what a coach does is help you navigate your own roadblocks.
Right. Okay, so sharing individual solutions, I get that. And I guess you're right. What we do in this podcast is talk about our thinking process, and I guess you're right, yeah. Okay, I guess...
That said,
go ahead.
That said, I think one thing I hope we're an example for is that we are engaging with the evidence. We value that. That's my whole role on the team. And like I not to reiterate it too much from before, but sure, we're victim to my biases, but it's probably the best way. I would say 3DMJ is an evidence-based coaching team, and I think that's something, because we definitely directly and regularly engage with the evidence. That's my job, and I think if you're a coach, you need to have some way to do that. That doesn't necessarily mean you're reading scientific studies yourself, but I would follow a high-quality research review in your area, or maybe, like I said before, just try to stay up with, position stands and meta-analyses or systematic reviews. I think that's, reviews are probably one of the easier things to write, and the more kind of high-quality, consensus. There hasn't been a bunch of letters to the editor about it because it's, overreaching. It is. That's probably something you actually do want to look at.
Yeah. damn, I had something. And then I was like, man, it's dark in Berto's house. And then I forgot what I was.
I'll turn on the light.
Okay. I was like, yeah. And I was like, is that Darth Vader? And then I forgot what I was. Okay.
It's good. I was like, yeah, it's dark in Berto's house.
I was. Because I'm looking at you and I turned my head. I was like, wow, he got real Latino real quick.
They're in different planets on this planet.
What was I gonna say? Dang it. Oh, okay. So I think also when we talked about gurus and like how we're also evidence-based and all that stuff, I think an important, I guess, distinction in when I was talking about how like when I first, y'all were my gurus back in the day, and now I obviously am your colleagues, which still blows my mind, but I know I'm improving my thinking when I don't take everything that you four say with 100% they're right and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously you can tell on this podcast now that we're comfortable enough with each other. We can be like, man, but I this and you that and I don't know about that, And I think, 7, 8 years ago, anything you guys or Lane put out was the way it was in my head. And now, while y'all are still at the forefront of people who I think are doing good work, I don't 100% agree all the time. And that doesn't mean it's not like 98, because it pretty much is almost all. But I have enough, I think, personal data to combat blindly following, right? I'm trying to think of like how else, because that just spoke to me too, and I was like, how do I know I've improved? Because y'all are still my go-to give me informations. But I think it's because I'm not so, just because I'm like 98% to 100% in total agreement all the time. But that is a big deal because y'all and we are, I think, the best at what we do.
Yeah, I mean, someone's information and confidence who you highly value and respect is not the same as I have somebody who I blindly follow.
Right.
That's not even being a person. That's not respecting your own self and ability to think. And I think that's, of course, you want to work towards that. And it's tough being someone who is a evidence-based content producer. It feels great when I make a video and someone says, liked before even watching, Eric Helm's the best. I will do anything you say. Like when I see that, I'm like, yeah, I'm awesome. And then at the same time, I'm like, wait, I'm doing that person a disservice, or they're doing a disservice to themselves. So that's why I think I always try to check my ego and remember that my first goal is to help people. And yeah, it feels good to be acknowledged, but I think it's easy to let that, that feels good, I'm the man or the woman, become higher value to you than the service you're giving your audience. And I think that's just something you have to constantly check yourself on if you're someone who's producing content.
Yeah. Are we talking to content producers?
Anyone who's
anyone, but
out there, I would say if you say your goal is to help people, you got to make sure that your ego is subservient to that.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to let that slip.
Yeah. And
it feels good to have people watch, and value what you have to say. Acknowledgement is nice.
Yeah. And that was Jeff slacking me and just lost my train of thought too. Damn.
Man, Jeff and Bert are the worst.
I know.
No lights.
They're the
slack,
worst.
terrible.
I lied. 96% of what they say is good. No, just kidding. I guess it's hard because I was in like 2013. I had my YouTube channel and I was, I guess, considered a semi sort of, I don't know if it was just like follow my perspective as I go through this, but I was also putting out content, and I don't think any of it was necessarily wrong, but I look, like Berto said, I look back and I'm like, that wasn't a good, it was all well-intentioned, and I 100% tried to collect knowledge and give it in a way I understood it, but I know that there were some things where
And by the way, you always let that be known, by the way. Like, I think that's huge. Like, sometimes people will talk about these things and not even bring up that this is kind of a game of telephone here.
Yeah. But I always gave credit.
Yeah, because there's nothing wrong with being wrong. I mean, we don't have a ton of articles on our website that we used to have up because we're uncomfortable with the information now.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot learn without being wrong. That is the process by which we learn. You can't develop critical thinking without being wrong. Like, Berto used to have the quote in his forums for forever that knowledge is the child of confusion, you know? And that's, you know, that's very, very true. So, like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with having incorrect information as an evidence-based professional, so long as you position it as, hey, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and then when you realize that you need to update your opinions, you go back and say, hey, I said this back in the day, here's why, here's some new evidence, here's what I think now, you know? And I think you've always done that.
Oh, thanks, dude. But it's like I had this, I learned better than the average person, because the average person doesn't even fucking know, how to count my macros and make that work for me. Like, how to be a flexible diet. So I made this little ebook, and it sold really well. And, like, then we come out with the pyramids, and I'm like, and so that little ebook has to go off because it is obviously not the best, or actually the whole website's shut down now. There's a whole new one because I felt like all of it was well-intentioned, but I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's an easy mistake. I don't want to call it a mistake either. It was all well-intentioned. It wasn't false information. It was like, here's a blog post on refeeds. Here's a video from Brandon Campbell, and here's a video from Eric, and here's a video from so-and-so. And from these videos, I got these 5 points. Like, that was what I did, you know? And I think it's just that...
How dare you?
No, but and I still do that now. I don't say toot my horn, but I think that's something that I just innately do is I take and I like remix and give. And you've said that in our meetings before, Eric, is you're like, you're pretty good at just stealing shit. And I'm like, yeah, kind of.
You're like a hip hop DJ.
Yeah, that's what I was going for. But I think that's an I don't want to say easy way, but it's a way to continue to spread information without having to feel like you made it, or that you have the latest and greatest, or that you have the answers. And I think that's another pressure is, like you said, to be new and different and on the latest studies. But
actually, that's a really good point, because there's a rash of people who steal content in our community. I mean, we've had the pyramids plagiarized. I've had articles plagiarized. I think anyone who's been around long enough has it, and it's not cool, of course, and you shouldn't do it. But I understand the pressure if you think the only ticket to the party is by being evidence-based, and if you feel like you're behind and you don't necessarily have the skills yet, but you don't want to put out wrong information, and you're like, you know what, I know this guy, you know, Alan Aragon or Lyle McDonald puts out, I'm just going to repost their stuff and hopefully they won't see it. But I think what people forget is, like, that's not the only thing that can get you credibility, and a real evidence-based professional acknowledges visibly when they don't know or when they're wrong and updates their beliefs. So, hey, there's nothing wrong with doing, like Andrew, you do a great job of citing your sources and giving respect to other people and in collating information from others. And I would say you've been very successful doing that. And I think that is proof that you don't have to steal shit, you know? And like I said, I understand the pressure, but you don't have to. You really don't have to. So.
Yeah. What's the point of this podcast? How do you know if you're science-based? Okay.
Yeah.
There's so many tangents. That's what Bert likes.
But they're relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel.
We haven't had an incredibly structured look at this picture, but I would say we've taken many different perspective looks at it, and we've got, you know, kind of a good, useful body of knowledge here.
Yeah. Evidence-based. What have we not hit though? Because I wrote down, like, you said I have most effective written down. Like, I think that was somewhere in the beginning of when you said, are you using the evidence in the most effective way?
Yeah, basically, I think that comes down to, you can't just engage a solitary piece of evidence and think you have the answer to it. You have to understand the limitations of science, and that's why some people get frustrated. They're like, "Oh man, studies can say anything." It's like, well, that's why you gotta know all about them. That's why we have meta-analyses, and that's why we have research reviews, and that's why we have position statements and that type of stuff. So I think you kind of have to, before you start reading research or getting engaged with the evidence, you kind of have to know how science works. And if you think science provides the one infallible answer, then you're already wrong. If you don't understand that the scientific method is about approaching information with humility and having a certain probability and confidence level around your outcomes, and knowing that it can change over time, or that it's just one piece of the puzzle, that research creates just as many questions as answers, then you have the right perspective to start engaging it. But if you're looking for a right, well, if I use science, then it's right, it's correct. So I just find the best science kung fu, and that's my God, then you're never going to be evidence-based.
Right.
And I think evidence-based also applies to you taking a look at what you see in practice. And I think you're kind of on the right track if, I don't know, something comes up next week where you're like, I kind of knew that all along, even though this is kind of like a nuance, because you're kind of on both. You're always a little ahead in some ways. If you're kind of if you're fairly split when it comes to what the research is saying and what you are seeing in your own practice. So I think that's why, Eric is super valuable to me, but so is Jeff. And I feel fairly confident going to either one of them with my own bodybuilding problems, know? So yeah, that's how I know that I'm in balance, when it's kind of when the bros say something and I can tell them why it's happening, Yeah. And then when my friend says something and I'm like, good, because that's kind of what I thought,
Yeah, and I guess it's we're fortunate in that we have collectively at any time over 100 athletes to bounce off each other too.
And have had for years. So we have a lot of good data collected. I think, that's just to reiterate it, because I know we've been talking so much about how do you engage studies. It's being evidence-based, that's actually the whole hierarchy of evidence. It starts with, the meta-analyses, the position stands, the scientific consensus is that you take into consideration. But so much of it is based on what is happening, the calls you make, and then, expert opinion. There's not always going to be meta-analysis to tell you what to do, And in fact, many times there won't be if you're dealing with coaches one-to-one. So that's just not even the right appropriate piece of evidence. And I think people who are too, quote-unquote, engaged with the evidence can have problems too, because they will think this doesn't go along with my understanding of the research. This isn't right. This person therefore is lying to me, or something is not happening right, or I don't they actually limit their options because of their understanding of what it means to be evidence-based. When evidence-based, actually a huge component of that is your one-on-one interactions and high-quality anecdotal experience as well. But those are very important parts of evidence-based practice.
And a part of, I guess, being a good thinker too, and when you say having humility, the importance of it is that you have to be able to change your mind or adopt something new. And that's not to say either, when we say Eric's our research and development guy, it's not like Eric comes to us with this useful piece of knowledge or this, hey, this could maybe work in some situations because it's not like we go, okay, let's go do that with all our athletes. There's already a plan in place, and there, I think maybe if you could touch on how to use the evidence, because it's not like you say it and we go do it to every athlete because that's what it said. Right.
I think, I'm going to steal from Dr. Zerdos on this one. He uses two words really well, conceptualize and integrate. So because scientific studies to have any kind of value have to be so tightly controlled, and they have to control so many variables, the direct findings or protocol used or manipulations used in that study are rarely applicable, but the concepts can be. So for example, the reason why we use a lot more 48-hour refeeds is because of a couple studies from back in the day, 195, 198, And in the 98 study, they were like 3 days of complete fasting and then a 4,500 calorie diet for like 150 pound females. That's not what we do, right? Yeah. And more so, they compared it to another one where they had 2 days of maintenance, and that was more effective for getting their hormonal regulation back on track. So I don't have people starve for 3 days before I refeed them for 2. We go, okay, so what we know from that, what concept can we get, and then how do we integrate it into what already makes sense? And that's what our discussions are when I bring up the stuff like, hey, I think we should do these 48-hour refeeds. And then it comes back with, well, okay, well, does that mean we need to have longer diets? Or do we need to use diet breaks as often? Do we need to start planning things out ahead of time? Or do you think this will slow down the rate of fat loss? Or have you had any issues with people with binge eating, with 2 days of maintenance after they've been starving, all this stuff? Or, what could this mean? How would you integrate that with training days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? That's what happens once I bring a piece of evidence to the table.
Again, and Eric, that one in particular, I remember it actually went really well with what we would see sometimes during our peak weeks, where usually we were rolling with these 24-hour refeeds, and it just so happened, and the only time, and it could be an athlete that was struggling to lose weight, you'd give them 3 consecutive days of carb loading, and they're coming back lighter. And you're like, oh, wow, like it was kind of there all along. And like one useful thing that I found from that, for example, is the fact that I deal with, I've seen athletes deal with less water retention issues. Yep. So even though we're technically, even though the energy balance doesn't make sense, we're losing more consistently because there was a lot of plateaus that weren't necessarily going on. They were just water retention issues. But it's something that we kind of saw in practice in this. I remember when we were having that discussion, I'm like, dude, that's why like my body.
Yeah, one of you guys brought up a client who lost their period and then had a menstrual cycle after a peak week, and it was like, it all kind of made sense. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but I think too, like Bert was already doing some of that, but I think another point I want to make is it's not like you say it and we go do it immediately because evidence said. It's that it works its way in its own mini experiment. Like there's going to be half the people on your roster that doesn't even apply to, and another half that there's like too close to comp that you're not going to fuck with that. And then there's like this little subset where like, okay, now I can take what Eric said and maybe try it out on these couple of people who I know adhere and I know have time and I know. So I think that's another way.
And some things just don't work.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I played with getting morning temperature from a few of my clients every day, and it just became a hassle. And I was starting to look into the reliability of how well does that actually predict anything, and it wasn't that good, so it just didn't quite pan out, so. Yeah. But I had a few clients who tracked their morning temperature for like a whole prep. And
that's cool.
Thanks, but sorry, we didn't keep it. It's not something we do with everybody.
Sorry to waste hours of your life, but yeah. No, but I think part of being evidence-based is not just like what you share on social media, but how do you implement it as a coach or as an athlete, And we talked about as an athlete, like one variable at a time and not being a jackass and changing it with every article you read, blah, blah. But as a coach, it's, take it in, but that doesn't mean that should be what you do with every athlete all the time. That you can run, like you're responsible for maybe getting the evidence from these peer-reviewed studies, but then conducting your own studies in your practice. Because maybe you do have contest prep athletes, we keep saying coach, but maybe you only have Gen Pop and none of this shit that we've been talking about applies,
Well, how many times have we tried Yohimbine and it just doesn't really seem to help and the costs aren't worth the benefits?
I haven't, but I know Berto has.
Well, that's because you came into us after doing it for many years and trying it. So
I was like, I've never done that shit.
We've tried it multiple times, and I'm not going to sit there and look at like the studies. It would clearly suggest it should help with fat loss, but the downsides to it aren't worth it, and the upsides aren't game changers. So no thanks.
Yeah, I just think we didn't make that distinction, but that the population. Like if you're writing articles for bodybuilders, but so-and-so is a coach of shit, even if you're talking about what happens at like the elite levels of leanness and maybe I'm a bikini coach only, like that there's things that even and then don't apply, like a male bodybuilder versus a bikini girl. Like that's how nuanced. So if you're reading, global, like if you're like, whatever this dude said, because he's a bodybuilding coach, but you have 5 bikini athletes, like that shit might not apply to them. I don't know, so I guess application of the evidence is also scary, not just what you put on social media that's scary or whatever, because I guess that's what we've mostly talked about, but how you apply it, it can be just as bad. Maybe not as many people see it, but it could be even worse. So
yeah, that stuff happens all the time. And there's like a few things that I always talk about, just about how to apply evidence, like focus on applied studies, not mechanisms. Or you'll have people chasing insulin or progressing muscle damage or stuff like that isn't actually doesn't make sense from an applied perspective. Yeah.
Cool. What else? I feel done, but I'm sure.
I'm satisfied. Berto, you got anything else?
Ew.
No.
Now that you put it that way, we're all real satisfied. No,
I'm spent. You guys have any more?
Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna turn out. See you next week. Bye.